Welcome everyone to this future-proof container terminal episode. Today we got a really interesting guest, Ramana, Jampala, CEO and President for Avlino Inc. And I will describe why interesting. And it's not only due to his experiences, but also due to his background leading different technology companies, and these days leading Avlino, an artificial intelligence company supporting customers on digital transformation, not only on the maritime industry, but also in the telecommunications. And especially these days that we are hearing more and more about AI, on how AI is shaping our future, how different companies are embracing this type of technology to create new competitive advantage. It's really important for us to understand what is all about this technology. So with this being said, Ramana, welcome to the virtual stage.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be on your show, and welcome all the audience as well.
Great, Ramana. So the plan for today is that I had been gathering some questions, not only from my colleagues, but also from different friends from the maritime industry, also interested in this type of technology. And we will go through them. So just feel free to share your lessons learned, your best practices and your thoughts about this type of technology.
Sure.
Okay, so for those who haven't got the chance yet to meet you, Ramana, could you share a little bit more about who is Ramana?
Absolutely. So professionally, I'm trained as an electronics and computer science engineer. And for 10 years, beginning 1991, about 10 years, I worked in the control and communications group of Rockwell Automation, where before AI was called AI, or before it was called expert systems, it used to be called fuzzy logic. So in the early 90s, we developed what's called as expert systems or fuzzy logic to control process using statistical process techniques to say, how do you go ahead and maintain the industrial processes to a desired level of temperature, pressure, and other physical parameters so that you can get a consistent output. So that experience lasted 8 years, following which I went back to business school. I'm an alumnus of London Business School, class of 1999. And during the late 90s, the first boom of .com occurred, and I relocated to San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and worked for a company called Viant, which went public, and we did the internet and digital strategy consulting. And after the company went public, we started a venture capital fund. And till 2010, I was a general partner at a venture capital firm in New York City called SAS Investors, where I invested predominantly in software technology companies. And in 2010, left out to start my own companies or ventures. And our first company was about a data acceleration company where we took compression, encryption, and deduplication, and we accelerated that using some hardware and some software techniques. And we sold that to a publicly traded company called XR. And in the last 5 years, with the same team that was there at my prior startup, we realized that, look, AI is not about giving a company a platform and say, hire your own data scientists, hire your own business analysts or software engineers. It needs to take a service delivery framework paradigm shift. And in the last 5 years, along with my other co-founder, I had started Avlino. And today we are delivering AI solutions specifically to the container terminals and broadly to the transportation logistics marketplace.
Wow, really interesting journey, Ramana. I can say you had been in the whole evolution of this technology since the baby steps until what we are currently seeing these days in the market. So really interesting. And Ramana, I always like to ask this question before we jump into the hardcore one, so to say. So how would you describe terminal operations in one word now that you are involved in this container terminals environment?
At the expense of being a little bit aggressive, I would use the word inefficient would be the one single word that I would describe. And then I would elaborate on that so that it's construed in a proper manner. Today in container terminals, data is available. It's siloed in multiple blocks. and the transparency that across the value chain or within a container terminal, there is no flow process, a data flow that really represents the operational workflow. And because of that, there are several inefficiencies that can be eliminated, at which point container terminals can significantly enhance their operational profitability and accomplish greater throughput with what they already have. So that's why if one were to ask me politically in an incorrect manner, one word I would say inefficient would be a word that comes to play. But a very important global role that container terminals play in global e-commerce, therefore they play a very significant role, and there is a huge opportunity to realize efficiencies and be more green.
Interesting what you mentioned, and I can also add here that normally, we got this task to identify which is the right level of technology that we need to achieve and balance it with the people's skills, especially these days to get out all these inefficiencies you are just mentioning and get the best of the both worlds, so to say here.
That's a very good point you mentioned, Chris, because let's correct a misnomer there. A misnomer being, many folks think that AI, if you ask them what is AI, they think of two things. First, they think that AI is about getting new IoTs and new sensors and looking at every piece of data coming in every 1 second. No. AI is about using the data that you currently have and then making a smarter decision. And second misnomer that people have about AI is it's going to replace people. No, it helps planners. As a human or as a software-aided decision making, we can take 3 parameters, 5 parameters, maybe 10 parameters, and we can think and say, how do I go ahead and realize efficiencies across these 10 parameters? AI essentially is an augmented decision system making where it helps the planners, the operators, the strategists to make better decisions. So it's not about getting new IoTs and new sensors and investing tens of millions of dollars in sensors, nor is it about replacing people. It is about taking or leveraging the existing data that you have and then making an helping the current operators and or planners to make a more optimized decision making. That's where I believe AI's first iteration in container terminals will lead to better success, Chris.
Yes, and it's a reality, Ramana, that probably a few years ago, the way of working we were used to, was quite okay. We were achieving our KPIs, but these days there are so many things out of our control, so many disruptions that we really need this type of technology. So, Ramana, I got a bunch of, I made like a short list here, and let's hear about your thoughts about these ones. And, for all those that we are passionate about technology and, we are always trying to find what is the newest technology, but for all those who are not aware of what is AI, without jumping in a technical aspect, can you describe what is AI?
Sure. There is one organic definition that Team Avlino we use, and that simple definition is AI means when you're able to help machines, computers, exceed or transcend. The word transcend means to exceed, to do better. When you can go ahead and make the decision making of computer systems better than human cognition. That is called AI. And let's use a reference point so that people understand that in a better context, Chris. I will take automation as a reference point. So what happens in an automation? A ship-to-shore crane control systems engineers will write a logic that defines how do you automate an STS crane operation. So a human cognition is involved there in saying under these if-then-else conditions, here is how the ship-to-shore crane should operate. Or similarly, if you're scheduling a prime mover, you've got a predefined logic based upon the possible routes, possible scheduling, possible dispatch, how should a prime mover move. But there the logic is all predefined. In AI, you don't write any rules. You don't define your logic. You define the boundary conditions. That is, you tell what should not happen. And then you leverage the concepts of probability, statistics, math, machine learning capabilities. You take all of this and you start teaching machines how to learn. And the inversion of pyramid occurs. What is that inversion of pyramid? In automation, you define the logic, and as an output, you get the business throughput, or you get business KPIs, like a throughput, number of moves per hour, or certain operational efficiency, percentage profitability. So predefined logic defines your operational metrics. Whereas in AI, you invert the pyramid. You say, you tell me what throughput you want, at how much utilization, and at what profitability. And in real time, the machines can come out with an operational logic that defines the sequence, which prime mover should pick this container up and where should it position in the yard. And it calculates all the dwell, the cost it takes to move the equipment, to use the equipment, the number of rehandles that will happen 3 days from now based upon what then the state of the yard is going to be. The AI is able to think all of that like a chessboard, and that logic exceeds the capability for humans to go ahead and make it that efficient. When you can teach machines to exceed human cognitive logic, that's our broad definition or an organic definition of what is AI, Chris.
Really interesting, Ramana. And how about the learning time for this technology?
Sure. Clearly, our viewpoint is that you can't just throw a large platform from one of the dominant vendors, which we will not take names, but you can't just go to a company and say, let me take your AI platform and slap it against a given data set and say, now start prediction. That won't work. So our view is that for a period of 8 to 16 weeks, whenever we engage a new container terminal, we come out with a clean slate. We don't come out with any preconceived notion. Yes, we have certain models that we have learned for an RTG operation. We have certain models that we have tuned for a pure straddle operation. We have certain models that we say if it's a straddle plus an ASC operation, we have some pre-built frameworks. But the first 8 to 16 weeks, we use an internal module, for example, which is essentially does one function. It goes, ingests all of the historical data, and then it maps the business process, 80% using machines and 20% using human in the loop. It maps all the business processes, and then it determines where are the inefficiencies, where are the bottlenecks. And then over that period, it creates a digital twin of the entirety of the operation. So it is not just calculating the dwell of an import container, or it is not just about cycle time of a prime mover. It maps out an operational process that says, if under a 68% yard utilization, and on berth 6, if I have got a vessel that has to discharge 2,000 containers, and it is this type of STS crane, which this operator, then it in real time calculates how much time would that STS crane take to discharge that container. Then which prime mover is available to bring that from the land site to the yard. And that yard crane, at that moment of time, how much time will it take? All of this is calculated dynamically. And to create this kind of a digital twin, a high fidelity digital twin, it takes our system a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks and a maximum of 12 to 16 weeks. And that is what we call as the learning curve for our AI system to go ahead and comprehensively create a high fidelity digital twin that represents the entirety of your terminal operations. Then you can start ingesting the real-time data and deploying, but that 6 to 8 weeks to 12 to 16 weeks is the essential time for us it takes for our machines, our AI, to learn and create a true operational digital twin of your container terminal.
That's awesome. That's really interesting. And I can say you can adapt this technology to a small, mid, and larger size terminal, right? There is no.
That's correct. It's completely agnostic, including our pricing. We don't try to say that our pricing is based on volume. There are general brackets that we say, if you're less than 500,000 TU terminal, then we'll price you separately, versus if you're a 1 mil to 1.5 mil, then separate, 1.5 or 2 and above, separate. That's the tiering, but we are agnostic to the specific volume of a container terminal.
Okay.
And in fact, I will say the contrarian view. We define everything by throughput. That means for a given amount of volume, what is the highest throughput can you be given amount of equipment, given amount of container slots or ground slots, what's the maximum throughput you can accomplish?
Okay, and Ramana, jumping a little bit more into your company, into Avlino, could you share a little bit more about Avlino and your why, and your purpose from, what are you planning to solve with Avlino?
Sure. So the purpose of Avlino was, when we started the company, we saw an interesting anomaly in the market. And that interesting anomaly is every company, as you said, in the last 24 to 36 months jumped on this bandwagon of AI. And their idea was, let me hire data scientists and let me give them the data and ask them to help make a business decision. This can be crystallized into one sentence. Companies were trying to hire data scientists and trying to make them into business analysts. And that's incorrect in our view. Because business analyst, he or she has many years of work experience, understands the industry dynamics, understands the mechanics of the process, and he or she then is able to make some informed decision. So we felt this was a contrarian viewpoint, and we wanted to do it other way around, which is we wanted to harden what a data scientist does, which is aggregating data, then cleansing it out, detecting outliers, imputing missing values, cleansing it, putting it against certain mathematical models, then tuning the parameters of these models. This is a fairly defined process. So we said, no, don't try to take a data scientist and make him or her into a business analyst, whereas give a tool to a business analyst so that he or she can become act like a data scientist to make a more optimal decision. So that fundamental inversion of pyramid, that is, don't try to make data scientists into business analysts, rather help business analysts to get the power of a data scientist, is the reason why we started Avlino. It was a contrarian viewpoint 4 or 5 years ago, where all companies wanted to hire more and more data scientists, and it wanted to go ahead and say, I'm going to quantify every of my process and ask them to make a decision. ROI came down. But then how did we build Avlino? Your second part of the question is, who is Avlino today? So Avlino today can be broadly or functionally, we have 4 quadrants of expertise, or teams can be divided into 4 quadrants. The first and foremost quadrant is what we call data engineering team. This is the team that has got expertise in taking several terabytes of data, large volumes of data, and not in a batch processing way, but in a real-time data ingestion. How do you ingest that? Then how do you deploy all of this as a cloud native solution? That means we don't want to burden our clients by saying you need to buy $1 million worth of hardware, you need to have 6 different types of software. It's a pure 100% cloud native. That means if you have an internet connection and a web browser, that is all you need. So that's the team that does data engineering and infrastructure expertise. Then the second one is what we call the data science or the modeling team. This is the team that has got expertise in statistics, differential calculus, probability theory, Fibonacci numbers, all of the things that help you to go ahead and create a real model that reflects your operational process, rather than taking a library of models like a random forest or a Naive-Bayes or KNN or CNN. Those won't give you high fidelity. So this team creates those kinds of models. Then the third and the most important perhaps competency is what we call functional expertise. That is, people who understand the operations of container terminal. These are people who come from container terminal operations background. They understand what's the difference between the operation of a front loader kind of container terminal versus side stacker versus an RTG versus a combination of only straddle or straddle plus AC. We have got a team of people who understand container terminals operations very well. And the last one is what we call the optimization team. Optimization team says mathematical models can create a lot of outputs. Functional team from container terminals tell you a lot of constraints. how do you go ahead and take both of the mathematical model outputs and the boundary conditions as defined by the functional people, and they automate how to optimize this. So it's these four quadrants of data engineering or infrastructure engineering: the mathematical modelers or the data scientists or machine learning experts, the functional experts who come from container terminal, and optimization team that takes this and creates the right output. The combination of these four is what today constitutes Team Avlino, Chris.
This is really, really awesome, Ramana, and I really like that you included especially this operational expertise into your team. I used to be part of the terminals, and yeah, you can have state-of-the-art technology, but it's a reality that the people's skills needed to run this technology is quite important. So basically, these guys got the really, working for 20 years, 25 years, so they really got an expertise that is really difficult to find. And just as you mentioned, you can have the best data scientists, the best guys programming, but if they lack of this operational knowledge, it will be a pity, because you will have like a top, the awesome solution, but operationally, it will be a nightmare. So it will not work.
And that has been Avlino's go-to-market strategy or market approach is also, which is today we have numerous clients asking in multiple verticals. And it's difficult to say no to business when you're a growing company, but we are trying to follow the discipline in a very stringent manner in saying, if we don't know something about pharma, or if we don't know something about fast-moving consumer goods, it's very difficult to say, here is our platform, here are a bunch of models, here is the data ingestion technique, here is the output technique, go knock yourself out. Therefore, we are sticking to container terminals, but our expansion plans are to what we call as to adjacent verticals, which is from container terminals, we are now expanding by the end of the year into railroad and intermodal transport. Similar problems, similar operational processes, and a continuity to container terminals. Then we are taking what we call as 3PL, which is third-party logistics or trucking, and finally aviation cargo. This is our approach to say AI delivery in transportation should include sea, air, rail, train. And that's the approach we are taking to say move into adjacent verticals, solve similar problems, and then you can draw the value you can have value across the ecosystem of partners where you can remove inefficiencies sequentially in each part of it.
Interesting, Ramana. And so a question rise up here, and there is any like prerequisite, like something you need to have in place before implementing this type of AI technology, for example, the terminal operation system, you need to have a standard way of working, or you just can implement AI right away, and this is always quite tricky, because you will normally get asked like what comes first, automation or standardization,
Well, let's start with the lighter side of things. For me, the only prerequisite to start an AI company was to be married for 20 or 25 years, because your wife constantly tells you, you're not doing things right, you're not doing things right. No, but kidding aside, the only prerequisite in my view is the mindset shift that AI is not replacing you as a decision maker. AI is augmenting your decision-making process to streamline or gain more efficiencies. That mindset or that fundamental shift should be there. And that's where I credit our current clients like ICTSI Group or like VIT. I credit them, or Ports America, I credit them because the management team has gone top down in saying, hey, operational team, today we have few sets of inefficiencies. Let a system come and aid you or augment your efforts. So I think it's just that mindset shift that AI is to go and complement what you're doing for process efficiencies, not replace. That's, I think, the only fundamental prerequisite. And technically or tangibly, the other fundamental prerequisite would be connectivity to the existing data systems. That means you should not try to be a person that is holding on to the data. You should realize that as an enterprise, the more data you share, the greater can be the fidelity or the replication factor of that operational plan. Therefore, the second mindset should be, I will share my data of my enterprise business function, and that will help me to create a better digital twin. These are the only two fundamental prerequisites I would encourage or recommend clients to think through.
That's really nice approach. And Ramana, I'd really like to ask also this question. How do you see that the role of change management when implementing this type of technology? You know, I can say this will be the difference between success or failure.
Yes, very important, very important. And let's take one example of what we mean by the change management there. If you're using AI to stack your containers in a yard, and if you start asking, why was this container placed in this slot for every placement, it won't be an effective way. But the change management should take a step back and say, let us define 2 or 3 operational metrics. It could be a rehandle count, or it could be truck turn, block in, block out, truck turnaround time if you're in an ASC terminal. Or it could be number of moves you need to make for delivering a truck to a container from a housekeeping perspective. If you define such metrics, and if you take a step back and say, once AI has been deployed, let us take a 1 week period, a 1 month period, or a 1 quarter period, and measure that for a similar yard utilization or yard, how much yard was filled up, and for similar constraints on the date of the month of the year or day of the week or something, let's compare these operational metrics and then determine that was the container placement by the AI system, was it more effective or less effective? So instead of trying to micromanage every specific move, if you try to take a time-bound review per day, per shift, per week, per month or something, then I think that mindset shift or that change program management or the change management to take operational view of things and see what determines your process efficiencies, what determines your throughput. That's where we would like the change management to say what we call as manage by objectives. Define the KPIs, define the management objectives, and let AI go ahead and deliver those MBAs, management by objectives, to you.
Nice. And Ramana, what challenges have you been facing to deploy this type of technology these days?
Internally, looking inward, finding people in these 4 brackets and putting them together to deliver a solution. That means a data scientist can't say, I don't know, I did a model, it's giving good output, nor can a functional expert say, no, you can't do that. You have to come together to deliver a comprehensive solution, whether it is to berth a vessel, or whether it is to stack a container, or whether it is to go ahead and do your vehicle booking optimization. All have to come together. So internally, finding these 4 different skill sets and binding them together to deliver a solution, that has been one of the challenges we constantly try to overcome. And instead of looking outside, and if you're looking inside out, our biggest challenge today is trying to have a clearer and a well understood definition of AI. I hate to use the word educating the market because that's not right. We are learning too. But at least evangelizing the true meaning of AI rather than it being a marketing or a buzzword has been the external challenge, to sit down with the top tier management saying, this is what AI means. Here is a step-by-step implementation roadmap. Here is how benefits can be quantified. And hence here is a 6, 12, 18 month clarity of implementation plan. It's meeting of minds with the senior management or decision makers with container terminals. That has been the challenge that Avlino is trying to overcome.
I can say this is totally a journey, and I am also in the eco-efficiency and automation journey, but I can say we got like similar pain points.
See, I'll give one last example there. The word green, it's very hip. Everybody says going green, going green. But the connection of the dot to say, if I'm able to go ahead and increase 1 move per hour for an RTG operation or whatever ASC, then I'm utilizing that much less equipment. If I'm utilizing that much less equipment, if it's a diesel operated or a diesel run RTG, then I'm reducing per shift this much amount of CO2 reduction or greenhouse gas emission is being reduced by this much. And hence, I'm becoming this much more green. This connectivity of dot, rather than just talking the talk of going green versus coming back and saying, how can AI be one of the ways to go ahead and accomplish that reduction of greenhouse gas emissions? That's the continuum or the flow of what I mean by evangelizing this with a client base to say how AI can help you to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions or better utilize your equipment or increase your profitability. That's the joining the dots we are trying to make sure we have, whether it's through webinars, seminars, direct interactions with the C-suite of the container terminals. That's been a challenge that Avlino is trying to overcome.
Yeah, I can add here that it's always quite challenging because it must be something operationally feasible, financially feasible. That's probably one of the most important here. Yes. And it also needs to be eco-efficient a solution. And during this journey, Ramana, have you figured out something or discovered something that you never expect you will face with?
Yeah. I can think of 2 points. One was, although everybody talks of it being a connected global village, but the pandemic and the post-pandemic clearly demonstrated how connected everything is, and you don't have to take an exceptional Suez Canal kind of event, but even otherwise, you start realizing what role does every part of every cog in the wheel, including container terminals, or what role do they play in the globalization. That was a big aha moment for us. Before that, it was understood in business terms, but now we realized it. And the second thing is the optimization of man, machine, and learning. It is not a zero-sum game. It's not machines are going to go ahead and do everything at the expense of humans, or humans doing without machines. It's that man-machine or human-machine and learning deliverance optimization is probably the second thing. The more and more we are trying to deploy AI solutions, we are realizing the human in the loop, aided by the augmented intelligence of machines. Well, how do you draw the optimization? That we are seeing it now practically. That's probably the second realization. And the third and the last realization is this is not easy.
Yeah, that's why I call it a journey, Ramana.
Yes. It's
Ramana, we without compromising any NDA, neither classified stuff, could you share any case you had been where you had been deploying this technology?
Sure. So we can give at least 1 or 2 examples where it is okay from a client perspective as well. One of our flagship customers is a very progressive group called ICTSI, which is a Philippines-based global container terminal operator with 25 plus ports, interest in 25 plus ports. So there, the first challenge that we initially, when we started working with them 1.5 years, 2 years ago, was the RTGs were performing less than the averages they wanted to see. And in that case, when AI was able to find out was RTGs moves per hour was a symptom, but was not the cause. We found the cause for that was the cycle time of the prime mover. Prime mover is an equipment that takes container from point A to point B. Cycle time is the time it takes to pick a container from a vessel, bring it to a yard, then put it in a particular block, go back to the container, to the vessel to pick the next one up. That's called cycle time. We realized the cycle time was about 2 or 2.5 minutes longer than what it should have been. And the reason why that cycle time was longer was because the yard grooming was not how it should be optimally groomed. So this sequentialization of finding the bottlenecks of the root causes, which is The grooming of the yard needs to be improved. The grooming of the yard will lead to reduced cycle time of the prime movers. Reduced cycle time of the prime movers means you can feed more containers to the RTG. Therefore, the RTGs will be able to do higher moves per hour. That's one case study I can talk about. Another case study is we can't name the client because it is not yet, the results are not yet published in production. But this container terminal uses straddles to bring the containers, and it uses ASCs to go ahead and do the block operations. And night 6 p.m. to morning 5 a.m., this container terminal uses few manpower or resources, human resources, to go and do all of this housekeeping. But then can machines go ahead and augment that housekeeping between 6 p.m. to 7 a.m. the next morning in such a manner that the truck's block in block out time can be reduced by 25%? Or can the number of moves it takes by the ASCs to deliver a container to a truck, can that be reduced? Or can the gantry operation of the crane be reduced by 35-40%? These were the objective metrics that we are helping another client, an East Coast client, to go ahead and accomplish. And once the production systems deliver results, we'll be able to speak in public domain.
Great, and awesome. I can say I'm really passionate about this one. And when you find all this improvement in your operation, it's really motivating,
Sure.
And Ramana, just to clarify here, so basically Avlino is supporting the TOS here. You are not planning to substitute the TOS, right?
Correct. Today we sit on top of a terminal operating system, and terminal operating system still performs the important task of aggregating data or all of the things related to billing functionality and other ERP functionality. We are sitting on top from a operational efficiency decision-making perspective to say, take the entirety of an operation of container terminal all the way from where to berth a vessel, how many key cranes to deploy, how many prime movers to go ahead and augment each ship-to-shore crane, then which sequence should be used to discharge and load a particular vessel, how do you stack your containers in the yard, how do you place your equipment, how do you determine your changes, how do you plan your gate functions or vehicle booking. This is the operational efficiency that we take a holistic view of the container terminal, and that's how we complement a TOS system or sit on top of a TOS system to deliver our AI solutions.
It's quite clear for me, and hope all the viewers got the idea of Avlino and how can you support operational challenges these days. And sadly, we are almost to an end here, Ramana. And I would like to ask you the final question here. What will be your message, for all those terminal operators that are currently evaluating this type of technologies, and they don't know where to start? What will be your message here for all of them?
2 or 3 bullet points. The first bullet point is be open to change, embrace technology, be open to change. That's the first bullet point. The second one is don't believe what you're reading about AI and IoT sensors and replacing humans or so. This is a complementary technology. You can leverage your existing data and your existing human talent to realize greater efficiencies. That's the second bullet point. And last bullet point is it is not gaining at someone else's expense. Container terminals play a very important role in the supply chain. Therefore, be more open to sharing data transparently, and a rising tide rises all ships. Therefore, the more transparency we have for data across the supply chain or value chain, the greater can be efficiencies that are realized by everyone. It's not a zero-sum game. That's the 3 bullet point summary I would have for container terminal operators.
Really nice message, Ramana, especially on these challenges days we are facing. And I think that's all for today, Ramana. I really appreciate your participation in Social VC Agenda, and I really hope to see you again in a future episode.
Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to tell you what our viewpoints on AI and implementation in container terminals is. And we look forward to contributing to your efforts as well.
Great, Ramana. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.